Welcome to NVC Life. I'm Rachelle Lamb, veteran NVC trainer and relationship coach, helping listeners navigate interpersonal conflict and ground more deeply into relational living. Greetings, fellow humans. Are your needs being met? Anyone who's familiar with the nonviolent communication model knows that needs lie at the heart of the process, cultivating an awareness of needs and seeking ways to fulfill them. Need recognition and articulation is the third step of a four-step process that supports people to resolve conflict, reconcile differences, and make life more wonderful, as Marshall Rosenberg was fond of saying. It helps a person increase their awareness of what goes on within themselves and within others. You can find a list of needs on my website as well as in Rosenberg's book, Nonviolent Communication, A Language of Life. When you look at the list of needs, a good many of the words represent values that are common to most people in our part of the world and likely everywhere in the world. The beauty of cultivating needs awareness is that people are, whether they're aware of it or not, attempting to satisfy one or more needs. For instance, eating satisfies the need for sustenance for one, as well as other needs such as enjoyment, connection with others, community, and sometimes comfort, hence the expression comfort food. We have other needs as well. The need for love, the need for respect, the need to be seen and heard, the need for honesty, trust, touch, the need for meaning and purpose in one's life, the need to contribute to life. You get the idea. Now, what I'd be interested in doing is taking an inventory of needs, and I'm starting with humans because it's typically our default, thinking about our human needs. When most of us think of relationships, we think primarily about our relationships with other humans. Food, air, water, shelter, these needs are essential to our survival, but when it comes to the interpersonal, we start thinking about things like love, connection, intimacy, honesty, trust, cooperation, etc. When I'm working with individuals or couples or doing a mediation, these are the kinds of needs that will typically surface. Now, because NVC is described as a language of life, and Marshall spoke of attending to the needs of all life, and because humans are not the only living creatures on the planet, let's just stretch beyond human needs. Many of you probably have pets. Those of you do often have a strong bond with them and feel very responsible for them. Pet owners recognize their pets' needs for proper care, affection, attention, play, love, and connection, to name some. And it's a reciprocal arrangement. Our animals provide us with companionship, loyalty, comfort, and more, and so it flows two ways. Now let's stretch beyond the domestic animal world and head outdoors. We might consider the bird and insect life in our backyards. In many places, the balance has been upset, and people do report diminished numbers. Let's look at our lakes, rivers, oceans, marine life that they support. Can we say that the needs of water and water life are being fulfilled? Have we conducted ourselves with those lives in mind? We drink and eat freely from lakes and rivers and marine life that live there. We consume, and yet what do we put back? I don't know about you, but it saddens me to see images of waste-filled waters or sea turtles and dolphins unable to free themselves from plastic bags or six-pack rings, to witness the loss of coral reefs and see so many creatures on the endangered species list. It's tragic and heartbreaking to know that our way of life creates so much waste that is harmful to life. The needs of life for love, care, and respect, those needs are not being met. I think of a mother whose children are fully dependent on her in order to live, who don't recognize the fact of their dependence and then do her harm to a point where she can no longer provide for them. It's a frightening scenario. And there's the air that we breathe. We know there are places in the world where the smog is heavy and compromises the health of humans, wildlife, and plant life alike. I've not yet spoken of the trees which supply us with oxygen and how the needs of trees and forest life continue to be threatened by consumer ways. If a forest could speak, and I suspect that trees do speak and that there are indigenous people who hear them perfectly well, what do they say when machine harvesters drive into the trees to deforest hundreds and thousands of hectares? We are speaking about an entire ecosystem where the needs of life are not being met. Human survival depends on the death of certain life forms. There's no way around it. It seems to me, though, that we must be willing to know this and not take more than is needed. I believe we are tragically out of touch with the needs of life and have a very distorted understanding of our own needs that in many cases resembles entitlement. Chief Warren Lyons is a Native American faith keeper of the Turtle Clan of the Seneca and Onondaga nations in what is now Upper State New York. For more than 14 years, he's been a member of the Indigenous Peoples of the United Nations Human Rights Commission. He tells a very moving story of his uncle taking him on a fishing trip and questioning him while their lines were in the water. His uncle asked him several times, "Do you know who you are?" And several times, Warren Lyons tried to respond, though he could tell his answers didn't satisfy his uncle. Finally, Lyons asked his uncle for help in answering the question. His uncle points to a young pine clinging to the edge of a bluff and says, "Do you see that young tree? That's who you are. You're the same as that tree. You see how it's holding onto the earth? That's how you are. We're dependent. We're rooted on the earth. We're part of the earth. We're the same as that tree. You're the same as that tree. You need water. You need light. You're dependent. Without the earth, you wouldn't be here. That's why we say, our mother, because it's your mother. You're dependent, totally dependent." Lyons then says, "After 4 years of university, I learned more on that boat, a couple of hours, and instructed by a man who never went beyond 5th grade. He knew a lot more than I did. It gave me a base of reflection." He gave me a lot that day. I'll include a link to the video in the show notes. And so while there's no doubt that our relationships with each other have the capacity to generate joy in our lives, our very survival is dependent on our relationships with the non-human world, the very land we call home. How might we reinstate a reciprocal relationship with our Mother Earth? One where we don't take more than is needed to live, where we praise Mother Earth and care for her. This constitutes a vastly different approach from the one that the consumer world currently has of taking without regard for the story of where our sustenance comes from. And so I'm talking about our needs here because it's important for us to recognize that it's the needs of all of life that matter. I'm quite confident that there was a time, long before we can remember, when our people considered the needs of all life, when we were rooted to a place, which is what it means to be Indigenous. It is to recognize that one has an obligation to the place where one lives in exchange for being able to live in that place. And so if we take that awareness and apply it to an understanding of needs, how then might we reframe our thinking around needs? How might we proceed? To start with, we wouldn't be taking from the land in the way we do now, or using the word resources to speak about land and wildlife. We wouldn't assume that we're entitled to ownership. We're not entitled to it. It's an impossible mathematical equation for everyone to live in the way that the dominant consumer culture lives. It's simply an impossibility. Even if we could, I don't think it would be good for us. It's not good for our psyche. It's not good for our soul, nor is it good for our relationships. And so here's the question. I'm returning to the very first question I asked. Are your needs being met, especially as you understand them to be inextricably tied to the needs of the rest of life. If the needs of the living world that sustains us are not attended to, what does that mean to you? How can our needs possibly be met if the world's needs are not met? Isn't it crucial then that we look to fulfill not only our own needs, but the needs of the rest of life and be willing to know what those needs actually are? Wendell Berry is an American novelist, farmer, poet, activist, and cultural critic. Now well into his 80s, he has published more than 80 books. I will conclude this episode with a quote from his book, The Long-Legged House. We have lived our lives by the assumption that what was good for us would be good for the world. We have been wrong. We must change our lives so that it will be possible to live by the contrary assumption that what is good for the world will be good for us. And that requires that we make the effort to know the world and learn what is good for it. Thank you for tuning into NVC Life. For future episodes, be sure to subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, or YouTube. For free resources or to book a private session with me, head over to RachelleLamb.com. Until the next time, stay sane, grateful, and generous.